Alright, it's picking me up now. It won't. We'll fix that shortly. Uh, Alright, now say something.
Okay, saying something.
Alright, it's picking you up now.
Nice. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Heretic had to reset his computer yesterday, and because of that, it sort of fucked with the audio input in his stream encoder, so we were having a bit of technical difficulties. But hey, guys, nice to be talking to you today. Sorry about that. That's probably not going to happen again, at least not for a very long time. Uh, so so normally we try and stream on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, but we weren't. Normally when we stream Tuesdays and Wednesdays, that's because we want to try and stream for 2 or 3 hours. Heretic. The reason we chose those days is because those particular days would allow Heretic to stream for the longest amount of time, but since we didn't really have another topic that warranted a 3 or 4 hour stream, we just decided to stream on Friday because Friday, I guess from now on, you guys can recognize Friday as days that we tackle low hanging fruit subjects that we feel like it's worth, or at the very least entertaining to do response to, but not really worth putting in the effort in creating a essay trying to explain why it's wrong. Gonna say anything, or are we just gonna?
No, sorry, I was just focusing on setting other things. Like, yeah, I was having computer troubles not long ago, and it screwed up a lot of stuff. I'm having to retool a lot of things. That's also why you had audio problems earlier. I mean, honestly, I was kind of just expecting it to just work, but yeah, it didn't. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the fact that we were able to even stream at all is actually nothing short of miraculous. But still, nonetheless, this is something we were actually talking about at the end of the stream earlier this week when we were talking when the topic of the skeptic community got brought up. So mentioned that Undoomed made this video as a pretty good example of exactly what we were talking about before,
So I'm not
where
exact. I'm honestly, I'm not sure if that was even if we actually were saying that on the stream, or if that was like in our post-stream conversation. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, you probably could have guessed this. After our streams, we talked for a little bit, and I was just, I was talking with Heretic about sort of the long amounts of time that it's been taking us recently, from upload to upload, and mainly, I feel kind of guilty about that because you guys really want content, but at the same time, I have recognized, at least I kind of suspect the reason why it's taking so long to upload a new essay is because if you were to go back to like Heretic and I's 2017, 2018 era content, he really did not have fully fleshed out like ideas on philosophy. We just sort of approached I mean, we could argue our positions, and we could explain our positions, but I guess I can't speak for Heretic, but admittedly, it wasn't until like late 2018, after I guess I had a bit of a like mini existential crisis, that I started actually realizing the importance of approaching my worldview by um, having sort of a tangible explanation of everything used to inform my conclusions. And just a long story short, um, I've come to view conclusions as an abstract, and everything that is used to reach my conclusions as sort of the only important part. You know, the axioms, proof of argument, proof of the concept's validity, and being able to being able to steel man that against competing explanations, and actually able to take into account competing explanation.
Uh, all right, it's picking me up now. You say something. No, give me a second here. All right, try something. Say something. No, it's still not. Frickin' hell! Why does it keep doing this? All right. For some reason, it's not picking you up. Can someone confirm if they can hear Esso? All right. So yeah, I'm just going to assume until otherwise that people can just hear Esso because yeah, he's been talking. So, anyways, yeah, that's his main explanation for.
And like, because of this problem being prevalent in mainstream like academia and philosophy, it's seeped into the sort of
Got it.
counter communities. Okay, so people can hear me.
Yes, you're good.
So a problem that I've noticed is just that well, there are a lot of problems that I've noticed, but one of the main ones is that when people are formulating arguments, they treat conclusions as though it's just sort of like a static part of a puzzle, and like they look at the argument itself as though it's a puzzle and every part of the argument is equal, when in truth the conclusion is an abstraction. Because of that, a lot of pseudoscience has been able to persist because no one places emphasis on explaining the validity of the axioms they use to arrive at their conclusions. And I've become more interested, I guess, in trying to explain why that's necessary, or just to add new things to the discourse as opposed to talking about what everybody else is talking about. Another Another thing that I don't like about that is this, like the subject. I've noticed that the subjects which tends to be promoted by the algorithms, so therefore the subjects that people are incentivized to write about, it tends to construct particular narratives which are awfully, like when combined together, are awfully expedient for our political rulers. For instance, the Jussie Smollett incident. Everybody was looking at that, calling this guy out as a liar. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to make the case otherwise. That dude had smoke coming out of his pants. But um, yeah, that was a total watch the other hand kind of subject, because at the time there were a bunch of different things happening. There was, the red flag laws being passed in a bunch of these different states. There was the U.S.'s military aggression in Yemen ramping up significantly. There were all of these attempts to lower the interest rates because the debt cycle was making the political economy increasingly uncertain, and many central banks around the world just straight up defaulted or were starting to try and implement negative interest rates, which means that they were essentially forcing investment banks to start giving out loans at net cost. They were giving away things in order to try and get people spending.
Mhm.
But my point though is that it distracted people from some very important events, and on top of that, there's also something even since 2015 and 2016 I've noticed about the sort of skeptosphere is that there's, in all of these subjects, there's sort of an insidious and underlying assumption within all these narratives that there's a culture problem that needs to be fixed. And I guess problem that I have with that is that sort of inherently insinuates a structuralist interpretation of society, which is why, unsurprisingly, a couple years on now, a lot of, I would say, the majority of the people who formerly were in this skeptic community are now identifying themselves as some form of reactionary, or went the opposite direction, quote unquote, and became some form of Marxian.
I mean, that figures. But I mean, I think I should at least talk about my own experience within the skeptosphere. Not that I was a participant, mind you, but I mean, I was subscribed to a couple of these guys, Sargon of Akkad, and as a subject of our own, for the video that we're going to be watching right now, Undoomed. They were cool, fun, and interesting in 2014, 2015, but as time went on, eventually the subjects that they talked about started to wear thin. We were talking about this after the stream on Tuesday, where you were pointing out accurately how they were all responding to the same videos and all saying the same things. And at some point, you just get bored of it. I remember in particular, just like Undoomed, his presentation is absolutely freaking fantastic. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty certain that he is a professional 3D artist. And the footage that
I
he shows is like absolutely phenomenal. I've seen a few of the things that he shows in his video in actually like mainstream music videos. But that said,
I distinctly remember watching a stream with had him in it, and he mentioned that he's a professional VFX contractor for major production companies.
yeah, that makes
So
sense. I mean,
I guess
yeah,
that's one that's a redeeming quality that he has. Is he's a gig worker, so whether or not he realizes it, probably not. But regardless, he's a counter economist.
Yeah, but I mean, he's also. I'm just saying this to point out that yeah, he is clearly very talented. But one thing he is not good at is actually making commentary, because at some point, like no matter how good his presentation, no matter how like I'm going to be honest again, like his voice is just beautiful to listen to. But I mean, you can only listen to him just replying to a video, and all he basically just says is, "You're an idiot. You're an idiot." He plays a video for like 15 seconds, and it says, "You're an idiot," and that's
And I
just the
suppose
entire video for like that's the entire video for like 7 to 10 minutes, and you're just like, why are they an idiot though? Just because they're feminists? Just because they're Marxist? Just because you apply some label to them? How about some actual substantive discussions about the ideas that they're putting forward and exploration into the philosophy? Maybe some speculation would be interesting. Maybe some citations, something a little bit more substantive than just "you are dumb." I mean, I would like to at least get
that's
an understanding of like why they're dumb. Maybe an exploration into this person's background, see what if any sub things they might have said in the past, something a little bit more interesting, more juicy. Instead, it's just basically it's like an apple, but only the skin.
But yeah, that's I suppose another thing that kind of puts me off about that skeptosphere of commentary is that because of the fact that in reality the subjects of discussion were largely set not by actual interest, but just by algorithms choosing specific targets. A result of that was you would get like dozens of channels or dozens of people making arguments, which just sort of copied one another. And you can't tell me that they didn't watch each other's content, then just copy whatever the other person was saying without actually understanding what the other person was arguing. Because one like they streamed with these channels would like stream with each other all the time, and they would collaborate. They knew about each other. They did that in order to gain more subscribers and cross promote the other's content. So but essentially, the bar for what was required to make an argument was lowered to the point where, and I think that this video might still be up. I know that the original, like, cringy white knight responding to this kid got taken down, but Bering made a response to some Leafy is here wannabe who was like trying to be a counter to the skeptic community, and failed. But like the video he was responding to was like a literal 12-year-old, I think, trying to just copy the arguments of people like Undoomed, Bering, or Sargon. That's the point that it got to, where like actual children or people with the intelligence of children like Mr. Dapperton could come along and like establish themselves as an intellectual and like be treated as such.
All right, now, anyways, we spent like 23 minutes just. I mean, we not really 23 minutes. We spent like 10 minutes fighting with technical difficulties, and then another 13 minutes actually discussing the
Fighting,
re-
fighting
context of
with
the video.
technical, fighting with technical difficulty and explaining why we hate the skeptosphere, along with why we regret making our older content the way we did. But
hmm I mean,
um,
I think it's useful as at least an exploration as to what our own thoughts and opinions were like in the past and how we've developed as.
sure,
I'd hesitate to call us intellectuals simply because that sounds a little, arrogant. But I mean,
yeah, it is for sure.
it does provide an explanation, or it is an interesting exploration as to our own intellectual development. I should say. Naturally,
So
we still have a long way to go before I'm even comfortable calling myself an intellectual. But I mean, it's still, well, yeah. Anyways, I think we should get started. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
for
anyways,
sure. But just the particular video that we were talking about, and I guess we should probably try and lay down some pretext for this at least. But one of the videos that I brought up, Heretic brought to his attention when we were talking about this was, because he mentioned Undoomed, and one of the worst examples I think I'd seen of this sort of Dunning-Kruger effect being allowed to prevail because of what I was just talking about a moment ago is a video that Undoomed made talking about the police responding to someone. I think they're like a Black Lives Matter activist or somebody, explaining why the police should be abolished. Their argument isn't necessarily, the one that you're seeing propped up by state media, which is essentially, it's being advertised as an abolition of the police or what they're arguing for, but in reality, what they're just asking for is like a reskin of the police. So their argument is essentially, oh well, if they didn't have guns, or if prisons weren't privately contracted, then the police would have less incentive to be unethical or to be coercive, which obviously is nonsense. It's a systemic problem inherent to the function of the state trying to set up a police force.
all right. Now, anyways, let's get started.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking, and I'd like to welcome you all aboard this Undoomed Flight 019er. Please make sure your seatbacks and tray tables are in their full upright position, and also make sure your seatbelt is securely fastened. Please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened until the fasten seatbelt sign is turned off. Thank you for flying Undoomed. Enjoy!
It's not just one bad apple.
Hello, I'm a Mac.
And I'm a PC.
The whole damn tree is rotten.
Could you save the metaphors till when you're actually explaining your point?
No, that's not a metaphor. And this is the sort of shit I was talking about, but these people have no idea what they're even arguing. That was not a metaphor. That was a generalization of what her point was.
Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody knows that me and Esso are critical of cockroaches as well and want to see that whole entire thing abolished. In addition, that said, the argument we get sometimes is that they'll say, "Oh yeah, but there are a few bad apples," as a way to just completely dismiss our point about the systemic incentives that are in place that encourage cockroaches to behave the way they do, to be as authoritarian and tyrannical as they are. They'll just say, "Oh, it's a few bad apples," to imply that if we got rid of the bad apples, that it would be great and wonderful and perfect. We know that it's not just bad apples. It's the fact that the system encourages bad apples to exist to begin with. But
it creates bad apples and allows them to become a problem in society by significantly putting them in a position of leverage to where nobody can actually respond to their aggression.
Mm-hmm. And the point that she's addressing is, well, I'm sure that she's made this point several times to other people, and they brought up the same thing. Like, look, the police are racist. I'm just assuming what her point is. I don't know if that actually is or not. And therefore, there needs to be changed. And she'll probably get into it later. But her argument is probably like, look, the police force is incentivized to be racist, And they probably then the reply she probably gets is, yeah, well, there's a few bad apples who are racist, and this is just a reply to that. In addition to as you said, a generalization of the argument that she's going to be putting forward.
Yeah, essentially, like the reason I feel comfortable defending her argument is because it's a lot closer to the conclusion Heretic and I would argue than what you're seeing in state media. It's she'll go on to explain it, but it does not. I mean, it's I guess in some of the nuances, there's areas of disagreement. But fundamentally, her criticism is police as an institution are a fundamentally bad thing because they're an institution, and same with prisons. And if you want to hear what I would argue is the most robust version of the case for abolition of prisons, because that's something that even a lot of Austro-libertarians I run into don't seem to understand or have a grasp on. There's a person whose work I would recommend looking up called Nathan Goodman. He's a contributor to C4SS, and he mostly specializes on that subject. But just giving him a shout out because he's a pretty amazing read, and for making the case of restorative justice and just against the punitive model in general.
All right. Anyways, let's continue.
I think when people hear,
Wait, your name is Khan?
hear that we're anti-police, they think it's going to be chaos.
No, first they think you're fucking idiots. Then
That's exactly what I'm talking about. We're only like 1 minute. We're not even like 30 seconds past the intro. He's already demonstrating what I was talking about earlier, where he just plays a short clip and then just says, "You're an idiot."
You're an idiot. You're wrong. You're an idiot. Therefore, you're wrong. Is essentially what a lot of Undoomed's arguments boil down to. And that the thing is, he's probably one of the worst examples of this. But out of that 2015, 2016 era skeptic scene, he's hardly unique in that regard. I mean, a lot of them don't have channels anymore, so there's not really a way for us to talk about them, let alone a reason to. But it's stuff like that is just I don't. Other than what I've already said, I don't. Can you even really say anything about it? It's such grug brain tier argumentation that it almost isn't even it's amazing to me that as many people took it seriously as they did.
I mean, I know that this is 2017. This video is from 2017. So I don't know if he still does this, if he still makes videos. I'm not even sure if he still makes videos. But, I mean, yeah, this is probably the main reason that the skeptic community became as irrelevant as it did. Not only because, YouTube is screwing around with their algorithm too much, but also because, fundamentally people found out that although it was fun at first, there was really little substance to keep it going. They didn't have anything in it to capitalize on the success that they were enjoying during the height of Gamergate. Now, let's just keep going.
they might think about the chaos. Just as I'm sitting here editing this video, I'm seeing news coming in that there's been yet another terrorist attack in the UK. You think things like that are gonna go up or down without the police? Fucking retard.
Oh my
down.
God.
It's gonna go down because the only way that the legislation forces are going to go away is if the state goes away. And if the state goes away, that means that all of the groups that are whose lifestyles are subsidized by the state, for example, the Islamo-fascists in Europe, they're not going to have a reason to stay, and so they're just going to go ahead and go back to a country whose climate they're not only more comfortable with, but where they have friends and family who all speak the same language. So when the police go away, you can easily come to the conclusion that, that kind of quote-unquote terrorism is going to go away. But I mean, then again, you could say that you could easily make the case that any sort of government violence is an act of terrorism because, politics is violence. Or terrorism is defined as political violence, and given that the state is a monopoly on violence, everything they do can be construed as violence. So, yeah.
Well, and this goes back to something that I was talking about in the Discord earlier today, where somebody was talking about like multiculturalism or whatever, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the stream too. But like this entire argument is based upon a false premise, and that right there is a great example of what I was talking about, where a lot of the Skepo subject matter is designed to promote sort of a structuralist view of society. So how do you explain the presence of Islamic ghettos in Europe? Outside of just they have an incompatible culture and they're not going to change their culture because they move somewhere else. Well, the fact that there exist these competing cultures within a single society is actually the result of effectively a government subsidy of that kind of that kind of behavior, because the reason that these cultures remain identical to places in the Middle East where it's sort of understandable how they emerge, because they live in societies where effectively they have to like fight in order to put food on the table. The way that like their incentives can remain sort of identical is because they don't have any incentive to actually interact with other people in society for mutual benefit. Why? Because you'll notice in a lot of these EU states that there are enormous subsidy policies specifically aimed at Islamic. They call them refugees, but some people would dispute that because they're not all coming from active war zones. But that's a different subject. Point is, though, if you were to get rid of the state, and if the state were to stop coercing money from people in those societies to try and essentially stimulate their labor markets, you wouldn't have this side effect where there are two competing cultures, because the people who are coming in from other parts of the world wouldn't be shut off from everybody else, and their values would change as an emergent property of being in a society where those values aren't really incentivized.
To say nothing of the fact that if they're there, we can assume with a reasonable degree of accuracy that they're there to assimilate into the native values because, well, they value it more highly than the one that they're leaving from. It's just, I think it's fairly reasonable anyway. Should we keep going? I kind of want to be on the pace here because we're going to be a little quick.
Long story short, though, just to what I was saying, would this sort of Islamic terrorism be less prevalent if the state's police didn't exist or the state itself didn't exist? Yes, you can absolutely say that without any shadow of a doubt.
The new abolitionist movement.
Fuck you. You've got nothing to do with a real abolitionist movement.
It's about transformative justice.
No, it's about fantasy land. That's what it is.
Again, more affirmation of exactly what I was talking about. Just, you're an idiot. You're an idiot.
Non-prison,
You're an idiot, so you're wrong.
Strategies for dealing with violence and crisis in our communities.
What the fuck are you talking about?
He started out the video by suggesting you're supposed to make your point and then articulate a metaphor, or I guess in this case state your conclusion, but he is not even making arguments half of the time. It's just, you're an idiot, so you're wrong, or you're wrong, not even attempting to explain himself.
I mean, it's very common for when people write an essay to lead with their thesis statement, which the thesis state or the argument that it's not just one apple, the whole tree is rotten. That's a pretty good thesis statement structured as a metaphor. So
Yeah, I mean, it's if you look at any major, scientific treatise or truth claim about nature, I guess to pick a controversial example, if you were to look at the Communist Manifesto, the very first thing that it states is the history of all societies previously and all societies to come is that of class struggle, paraphrasing slightly.
mhm.
That is essentially a summation of everything that, like, the Marxist position would argue about history and would argue about the nature of society. If you look at The Ethics of Liberty by Murray Rothbard, you see similar sentiments expressed about self-ownership and that needing to be true and proving that that's true in order to make the case against the state before he actually even really makes an argument for it, and then he goes on to make an argument for it. So that's just stating a preface of your conclusion is very common in essays or scientific theses.
Let's say some guy blows someone's head off. You think their family members are going to be happy with a little transformative justice?
That's actually hilarious because one of the main criticisms that the skeptosphere used to have about feminists is their common appeal to emotional rhetoric, or rather just reliance on emotional appeals. Whereas here he's saying like, oh, but if your family member gets blown off or your family member's head gets blown off, do you want the guy who did it to be punished or be transformed?
And that's a fundamental mischaracterization of the concept of alternatives to punitive justice.
Mhm.
We, by the way, are not arguing transformative justice, but that's we would argue for restorative justice, which fundamentally entails essentially a counter to the concept of punitive justice, but. Essentially, he's attempting to insinuate by using purely emotional appeals that in the absence of the punitive justice model, there's no way for somebody to be compensated for a crime. And that's just absolutely nonsensical. First of all, that is something that's impossible to argue from a point, from just a sort of central top-down point of policy or legislation, because everyone values whatever was taken from them differently, or whatever aggression, or has a different level of pain for an act of aggression. Nobody has the same evaluation of these things. And likewise, every crime is different. So that is one way in which punitive justice just doesn't work on a conceptual level. But also, punitive justice, well, I'm just going to say two more things and then we're going to go on if you don't want to say anything. But one of the major problems with punitive justice is that there is absolutely no compensation for the victim. It's just the state taking money from the person who aggressed against them, and the state being able to do anything to the criminal regardless of what they actually did. There's absolutely nothing that the criminal can do about it. In fact, what even counts as a crime has no basis in whether or not the criminal actually aggressed upon another person. In fact, 86% of people in the United States are in prison because they committed a crime where they never actually aggressed upon another person. So
You accidentally implied that 86% of Americans are currently in prison.
I meant out of the population of people who are in prison.
So 86% of criminal or convicted people are nonviolent, which of course makes a lot of
Okay, yeah,
sense.
I guess if I play that back and misspoke, then I guess I did. But so I guess something that you could say is that, well, for one, it functions effectively as a subsidy for crime because it's set up specifically so the state is able to appropriate labor and resources out of the person who is accused of committing a crime, whether or not there's even a victim. So, I mean, I guess if I was a victim of a crime, I certainly wouldn't want the states to be involved.
Now,
Also,
sorry, I'm just going to try to go with the Undoomed's angle here. Think about it like this. If you are the victim of a crime, would you want to also be forced to pay for the person who wronged you's lifestyle for the duration of their sentence and effectively be double dipped? Not only have to endure and eat the cost of the crime inflicted upon you, but to also eat the taxes that are being used to help keep them alive? Or would you rather have the person who wronged you, pay you back for the amount that you both agree upon that they wronged you from? So, just from a purely emotional standpoint, which is preferable? I think we'd all prefer restorative justice in that regard. Now, obviously, this is just a question. I'm just trying to appeal to preferences here, but I mean that's as far as Undoomed apparently is willing to go in terms of exploring these topics. So, yeah.
that's the first thing I said. Is it's kind of it's an absurd question. What do you prefer?
Mhm.
Because every crime is different, but I mean, I could also make the case, and anyone could very easily make the case that the state does a lot of things to people who are convicted as well, regardless of what they've done, which make it essentially impossible to live a life that's not entirely dependent on some state agency, whether it's the prison themselves, which you can see this in a lot of places. The fact that there are people that deliberately go commit more crimes, which are worse than the ones that they committed previously, just to get sent back to jail because the state limits all their other possibilities. And if that's not the case, then they essentially can't get a job, so they're forced to be like wards of the state effectively because they need to live on welfare handouts.
All right, now let's continue.
No. No. They're going to want that fucker to go away for life. At least.
Who hasn't had a bad day?
What the fuck's that got to do with anything?
Who hasn't felt anxious or depressed?
What are you talking about?
Wait.
The question is, should anybody deserve to die because of it?
Well, apparently you do, because a society without cops is a society based on vendettas.
Oh no.
So you just completely ignore the fact that cockroaches also go out with vendettas. And when they have bad days, as she is pointing out, they're incentivized to take it out on whoever happens to be available and whoever they know that they can get away with killing or beating or just straight up framing for a crime that they didn't commit. I mean, how many stories have you and I read where some cop gets caught after they planted meth or pot or something in someone's car? Dozens of times.
Or whether or not, they thought somebody was dealing drugs and like a 3-year-old ends up getting shot and nothing happens to the cops that shot the fucking kid.
Mm-hmm.
No, This is absurd as well because it implies that in the absence of state arbitration, the state having a total monopoly on arbitration, it mean that there would be no that justice would just be arbitrary, and that's hilarious because the mere presence of a monopoly on arbitration means that justice is arbitrary because there's nothing to counter the state's decrees. In fact, the state can just make decrees based on nothing, and they can't be challenged.
And
Like I
keep
was
in
talking about earlier with people being treated as criminals for not actually doing anything.
Now, one thing I also found hilarious is earlier, Undoomed actually said that she deserves to die. I mean, at this point, he's going straight full Hoppian here, where you can just be killed for disagreeing with him. Okay, great and almighty Undoomed. I guess he's going to be the natural aristocrat of his covenant community, and he gets to decree who lives and who dies.
Yeah, not surprising that Hoppa's ideas have started taking off in the former Skepos who are still around. I've seen academic agent quoting stuff that Hoppa wrote, even though to be fair, considering academic agent a skeptic is kind of essentially of the variety that we were talking about, kind of pushing it because he at least tries to frame his content as, you know, intellectual, well thought out essays. But we have something really juicy for the final part of the Hoppa essay, which is basically done. I'm not finished writing it, but I wrote like 2,000 words today, and we just need that recorded, which at this point could probably be done within the next week.
Yeah, it should be done shortly. I'm just proofing over my part because there's a few. Every time I read it over, there's always a few things I want to change, and I'm currently in the process of adding an additional part related to. Well, I mean, I think you can see it if you open the script. And I'm talking to SO here.
The part that's gonna be especially juicy, given the context of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. But anyways, I'm gonna keep playing.
It's vigilante justice and lynch mobs. And also, if you're in trouble, who are you gonna call? What, your fucking neighbor? What?
Yes, I would be a lot more comfortable calling my neighbor because not only can they get over to my property significantly quicker than cockroaches can, but I also trust him significantly more because guess what? I formed relationships with him, and even if I didn't, well, he doesn't want criminals doing anything on his property, and his property is literally right next door, so therefore he's understood as well. We have a direct financial incentive to work together to mitigate the problem that is crime. I don't see why you would have a problem with this. And I mean, like,
Also,
I don't even know where to begin.
when you work with your neighbors, either, you know, as in the form of a contract, a network, some mutual aid model, or however you go about achieving justice for yourself, just having somebody to have to come have your back in the case somebody is trying to break into your house, for instance. In that case, they have a direct incentive to protect you. In the worst case scenario, in the worst case scenario, you don't know what their incentives are. Whereas with police, you know exactly what their incentives are and what they're going to do. In which, you know, that the chance of you getting arrested is just as likely, if not higher, than the person who actually aggressed against you.
Mm-hmm. And very often we've seen examples of people who call the cops either because they see something or they're being aggressed against. They're the ones that either get arrested or get shot. It's far from an unheard of thing. It's actually a real problem, especially in the United States. But anyways, let's keep going.
What about those people
videos? I was just going to say there are videos coming out of California within the last couple months of people with guns trying to defend their stores from rioters who, they're calling the cops because they think that the cops are going to come try and back them up, and then the cops end up like just allowing the rioters to destroy their stores and arresting the people with guns.
Well, yeah. I mean, what's the greater trouble? What do you think is going to be easier for the cops to do? They need to fill their arrest quotas. So who's more likely to fight back? A bunch of people in a fired up, angry, frenzied mob, or one guy who called them earlier, trying to peacefully defend a store and is otherwise completely law abiding, but for their brandishing a scary looking black thing.
And yeah, in that case, I would be a lot more afraid of a police officer than a rioter, because if you try to defend yourself from them, they're going to call up dozens of their buddies who are all just as armed as they are, if not more, and nothing, regardless of what they do, nothing is going to happen to them, because the arbitration agency that you're going to have to go to to resolve that conflict is the same organization which owns the organization they work for.
All right, continuing.
What, your fucking neighbor? What about those people who aren't very social? Ever think of that? Fucking moron.
The police is
somebody who is then. Yeah, that's a really easy solution.
Mm-hmm.
What if your neighbors aren't social? Call your neighbor who is social then.
Or hell, just like
hire a contractor.
You can easily just already form a relationship with them. Just like stop by every once in a while. It's not that difficult to just be like to swap phone numbers and just be like, look, if something happens to me, we can just text each other and we can work together, because the police are probably like minutes away and you're right there. That's something that's very easy and simple to do. And I think even if you're not an ideological anarchist or just police skeptical in general, a lot of people are going to be completely willing to go along with that arrangement, and I think it's quite reasonable. Anyways, continuing.
Ability is to manufacture criminals.
You're a conspiracy theorist.
So here you have for-profit
You're a
prisons.
conspiracy theorist for having a competing interpretation of the nature of something which I'm not articulate enough to be able to respond to.
The state literally does, and legislation enforcers do create criminals. Not only have the FBI been caught entrapping people into criminal behavior over and over and over again, but police officers will also arrest people for resisting arrest, or do things like frame people for possession of drugs when they coerce them into like doing a search of their vehicle, and then they can just arrest them on that. So yes, this is something that they actually do.
This is completely uncontroversial, and nobody who seriously has given this shit enough actually, think about the subject or look into the evidence could dismiss that as conjecture. I mean, the police agencies in most countries of the world have literal fucking quotas to give out as many tickets as possible and arrest as many people as possible to generate revenue for the state. Specifically to generate revenue for the state. It's not even a question that they do this. Obviously they do this. The only question is, how deep does the rabbit hole go?
Which I figured that even you and I have only just begun to scratch the surface.
The true depth to how low the rabbit hole goes, I don't think will be known until the state's gone.
Probably not. Like all of those classified documents becoming unclassified. That'll be fun to go through, to say the least. Anyways, continuing.
Prisons. When you create space, you create a demand.
Okay, that's ass backwards, but go on.
That means
that's literally what the state does, though.
Mm-hmm.
Because the state doesn't actually. So Undoomed here is making a mistake of trying. For one, he's assuming that the incentives of investment are always determined from the top down, specifically the supply side monetarist view. Oh, you have to have these things in order for people to know that they want them. The other mistake he's making is he's treating state services in the same way as something that is created privately or is sold in a voluntary basis. And in the case of state services, the state literally does create constructs in order to, as a pretext for generating revenue for itself. A war would be another example of this.
Monopoly. This is what happens when you create a monopoly. You end up needing war in order to resolve conflicts between them. Now, anyways, I'm just going to keep going.
Build those prisons, and we build those prisons. Build those prisons, and we have seen that it's largely transgender people.
What? There aren't enough transgender people in the country to fill prisons.
It's.
I'm gonna give Undoomed some credit here. I don't know, but to be fair, I don't know anything about like the prevalence of transgender criminality or how often transgender people are put in prison. Would you know anything about that?
No, and it's personally, at least I would argue, it's irrelevant to either case here.
Yeah,
I mean, if you're unless you're some sort of like intersectional Marxist critical theory type, it might be worth noting. But considering that the incentives are rooted in the state's financial schemes, then no, it doesn't really. That even if that were true, it doesn't really matter.
It really only matters to SJWs and to, well, the skeptosphere.
Black people, it is Native people, it's Latinx people.
No, it's fucking criminals. Jeez.
And of course, who is a criminal? People who commit a crime. But who determines what a crime is? The state, and the state determines also who a criminal is. I'm starting to see there's a problem here.
It's entirely circular reasoning.
Jesus fucking Christ.
I guess we could continue because not really much more to say about that.
Jesus fucking Christ, you don't get sent to prison for your race. You get sent to prison because you committed a crime. And what's with the Latinx bullshit? Did I miss a memo or something? Are we not allowed to say Hispanic anymore?
When you have that demand, then you...
I think it was the Central Americans who passed out that memo, mostly because they hated being misrepresented or having their country of origin be misrepresented. I'm not Honduran, I'm Dominican, completely different. Sorry, just a little...
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. There is an actual practical reason for doing that. But I think that the X suffix was an attempt to make it gender neutral. I wouldn't necessarily, argue that is a that's a practical reason for doing it. But I mean, yeah, I understand for sure why they don't go by Hispanic or Latino. Yes.
All right.
Hispanic anymore.
When you have that demand, then you also have to create incentives. That trickles down to police, who also now have the incentive of creating criminals.
The only people who create criminals are criminals. How do you not understand this?
That's actually true. As what is defined as a criminal is ultimately defined by people whose mere profession is a violation of natural law, which makes them actual criminals. So yes, this is correct, but not in the way Undoomed thinks.
And not for the reason that he thinks. Have we gotten any donations? Is that fucked up too?
Oh no, we haven't gotten any donations, but I did check, and those should work.
All right. I was just wondering because we haven't we haven't gotten any goof.
I mean, there's a little sound effect that plays that you hear on stream, but I don't think you can hear it. That would let me know that we got one.
All right.
Justice anymore. It's about profit. I think we start with the demilitarization of the police.
Because of her level of emotion, not very useful in terms of information.
Police don't need assault weapons.
It's not in okay. The last part I am not going to comment on either way. I think that it's kind of ridiculous to expect the state to disarm itself, but what she's making here is a perfectly coherent argument, whether or not you agree with it. So to dismiss it as emotion or conspiracy theory is like so intellectually mind-numbing that are you thinking about this at all, or is it a product of what I was saying earlier, where you just want to top the algorithms because Black Lives Matter was relevant at the time?
Probably. I mean, I don't know. Anyways, continuing.
To protect people.
Oh, really, asshole? How about the North Hollywood shootout, where the police had to endure for 40 minutes because they didn't have anything that could penetrate body armor? Remember that, you fuckhead?
Yeah, because every single engagement that cockroaches get in, every single altercation involves juggernauts wearing body armor and being heavily armed. Yeah, I'm sure that makes total sense. Especially considering the overwhelming increase of SWAT raids that have gone on over the years, where a SWAT raid was virtually unheard of in the 80s, whereas nowadays they do that for virtually everything, just to justify the fact that they have tanks, military-grade body armor, and automatic weapons now.
Also, I'd just like to point out that if defense were network-based, decentralized, or issued by contract, that would not have been a problem. In fact, nobody except for the people who were trying to rob the bank would have died, because everybody would have had a gun, and they would have been significantly more endangered and less emboldened than they were.
I'm almost certain that there is an argument to be made for artificial scarcity created by the state that ultimately incentivized the people in that shootout, which I admit I don't know much about it at all. But I would imagine that it was largely driven by state influence in something or other.
Undoomed's characterization of it's pretty accurate, but it was basically in I want to say it was 94. Two guys with I think fully auto AK-47s and body armor that couldn't be pierced by 9mm went into a bank to try and rob the bank, and they killed I don't know how many people off the top of my head. But another problem you could bring up is the fact that there are bullets that are way stronger than what their armor was. But why is the state using 9mm rounds? Because it generates the most revenue for them. And it keeps guns that are strong enough to it creates exactly what you were saying, an artificial scarcity of guns that are able to pierce Kevlar and are able to pierce the kind of armor that they put on tanks, even though those bullets do exist. And why do they do that? Basically to protect themselves from you.
Yep. Anyways, continuing. Hold on a second.
The cops had to run the fucking The cops had to run to fucking gun shops just to try to find something that would take these robbers out, and in that way trying to save the 20 casualties that were still laying around in the middle of the shootout. But oh no, you don't want to think about that. You just want to think about your hunky-dory little fantasy.
The second thing that we can do is really look at police budgets and create models and economies for that divestment from the institution of policing and the reinvestment in community models.
Yeah, good luck finding support for divestment.
Okay. I don't remember that part, but yeah, Heretic and I are gonna go ahead and disagree with that. That's what this person's arguing now, is just a reskin of the police.
It's really hard to say because she cloaks it in such vague, flowery language and platitudes. Just investment in the community. What the hell does that even mean? Are you giving the individuals within that community a check? Are you using it to pay for certain infrastructure, to subsidize certain community organizations, to create new community organizations, to build this, to build that, to build everything under the sun? Are you building a sewer system? Are you renovating this? Are you using it to simply demolish it, and you're calling it an investment in the community as you try to, I don't know, gentrify it? What this could possibly mean is subject entirely to the arbitrary whims of whoever happens to be there. But it sounds nice. It sounds good. It sounds pleasant. It might be exactly what you're talking about. Just they're not going to be calling it police. They're just going to call it enforcers or arbitrators
Collective militia.
or collective militia. Yeah, but it's so vague that it's impossible to say. And I can guarantee you, if you try to corner them about it, it's like you're talking like, what the hell are you talking about? Then they try to give you some very vague explanation that kind of makes sense. So you say, okay, it's this. It gives them wiggle room to just leap out of that and just say, no, it's not that. It's something else that's completely vague and meaningless.
It's kind of interesting how a lot of the sort of stereotypical state media BLM argument is centered around the pretense of looking at incentives and walking away with the conclusion that police or prisons are inherently coercive, then not affording that same scrutiny to whatever they want to replace the police or prisons with.
Yeah. Anyways, I'm going to keep going.
That means taking That means taking money out of police budgets and slowly phasing out police because we don't actually need them in our communities. They don't keep people safe.
You're just talking out of your fucking ass. So tell me, what does keep you safe? What, your local drug dealer?
Oh, crackhead! Murica! Oh, you don't like police? Why don't you call the crackhead down the street? God, this is like getting into 2012 era, boomer Mitt Romney conservative bullshit.
Actually, yes. Yes, I actually would prefer to call my local drug dealer, my local crackhead. Chances are I have a pretty positive relationship with him. He knows how to use firearms more likely than not, and therefore I probably have a decent business relationship with him. I'm not using crack myself. I'm not a buyer from him because that's not something I do, but I would still have a positive relationship with him, and therefore I could have a reasonable degree of trust and expectation that if I call him for help because some people are aggressing against me, that he would actually act according to, well, how I would hope he would, as opposed to the police who already have an incentive that's completely contrary to mine. So in terms of the police versus the drug dealer, yeah, I trust the drug dealer every day and twice on Sunday.
Yeah, and I guess that's not even getting into the prevalence of people being crack addicts in a stateless society versus a state society. Where if the state wasn't getting in the way and creating all these disincentives for people to actually go out and get treatments for addictions, or are not manufacturing the basis for why people get addicted, creating all these weird incentives in society that cause people to be traumatized by the time they're adults, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's continue. We're going to have to wrap this up real quickly because I got to go soon. So this will probably be the last segment.
All right, sure.
When you're looking at it from the lens of race.
Good point. You know what they say, information is not power.
Wait.
Yeah, that's something we absolutely should not do. I don't have to roll the Morgan Freeman clip again, do I?
In this country, it's absolutely easier to manufacture criminals around that.
So stop doing it then!
When people's skin becomes weaponized, particularly black skin.
You mean weaponized like Black Lives Matter does?
Also, hold up, did Undoomed low-key just insinuate that every black person who is committed of a crime, or but did he just buy into her narrative about race a little bit, make the case that all black people are criminals?
That's I think I missed that. Let me back up a little bit.
Stop doing it then.
When people's skin becomes weaponized, particularly
pause it because you're still past. So basically, what she said was, we got to look at this from the perspective of race, and when you do that, you'll see all these problems. And he said, "Stop doing it then," referring to what he was saying earlier about people, like his circular reasoning of, well, the only people who are criminals are criminals. So her argument is the state is being racist or whatever, and that's why black people are disproportionately targeted. I don't know whether or not there are arguments that could be made either way on that subject, and his response is, well, black people should just stop committing crimes then.
I don't even know what. I'm pretty sure like when he said like stop doing it, he meant stop looking at this issue from the lens of race. Now, to be fair, like there is a case to be made that cockroaches are not racist, and certainly not systematically, because I think I mentioned before that they've done studies about the crime reporting in relation to conviction ratings, and found that like reporting rates refers to if you're the victim of a crime and you report it to the police and you see who did it, you'll try to give a physical description, and part of that will be the perpetrator's race. They're white, they're Latino, they're this, they're that, and the conviction rating matches up pretty closely to the report rate within a standard deviation. So it's not really a question of race. It's just that certain races do perform or do engage in criminal behavior more so than others for reasons
I've looked at those studies as well, and something that I find suspect is that they defined criminal behavior as what the state considers to be criminal behavior, which is, the example of you're under arrest for resisting arrest,
or the whole drug thing. Now,
yeah, well, there's of course how the CIA specifically went out and tried to get black people hooked on drugs in the late 70s, early 80s. But what I was about to point out as an example of the state creating an incentive to be racist is post 9/11 profiling. They give out like a certain list of things people are wearing, and like what skin colors that they if people of that skin color are wearing that article of clothing, and that's a reason to stop and search them. For instance, that's a policy that was actually enacted by New York City following 9/11, and I don't know if that's exactly how it's been how it's been enforced since. Wouldn't surprise me, but if you're telling cops to look out for black guys wearing red t-shirts, then black guys wearing red t-shirts are going to essentially be targeted, and because they're getting targeted for a search, that's more than likely going to lead to weed being planted on them, or the whole you're under arrest for resisting arrest being pulled, because of the fact that cops also have an incentive to do that to people that they have encounters with.
Mm-hmm. Now, as I said before, like, we unfortunately do have to wrap things up because, well, yeah, I gotta get going. The reason that we have streams on Tuesdays and Wednesdays more often than not is because that's when my schedule opens up. So this is meant to be just a quickie stream. So, anyways, yeah, we gotta get. At least I gotta get going. So, I suppose this ends it here. So, thank you for stopping by, and we'll see you on. We'll do a stream on Tuesday. Sound good?
Yep, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Plenty of time to find a subject. All
Yep.
right. Well, see you guys later.